represented in international water policy. This side event will address the challenges of present approaches to water governance and sustainability for Indigenous peoples. It will examine the contributions of Indigenous knowledge systems as complete bodies of knowledge that include information about science, policy, law, cosmology, and more. Furthermore, we will explore how best to respect Indigenous peoples and their governance systems, which center on understanding of water as a living entity. I would like to acknowledge that today we are on the lands of the Lenape peoples in New York City, originally known as Lenape. I apologize if I'm butchering that, which is the Lenape name for homeland. And we will start with an opening prayer by one of our panelists, Colleen James.
Good afternoon, my brothers and sisters and fellow humans. I'm going to stand here with a bottle of water, and I'm going to lead this prayer in a little bit of a different way, because as a collective, I believe we're way more strong. So I'm going to engage you in this little prayer effort together, because collectively we put our consciousnesses together, and we're going to give some gratitude and appreciation to water. So I would like to give thanks. We call it in our language, and to be grateful and acknowledge it, but also as a collective consciousness, when we say I am, it's the most powerful statement we can make in the universe. I am water. I am land. So I would like you to join me in just closing your eyes for a minute. Think about, where is your water? Think about your favorite memories of being around water. Just think about your connection and your relationship with water in your life. And as you're thinking about that, I'd like you to say with me and follow me in the I am statements. I am human.
I am human.
I am water.
I am water.
I am earth.
I am earth.
I am committed.
I am committed.
I am action.
I am action.
I am water.
I am water.
Thank you for this opportunity to put our hearts and our minds together on behalf of our very futures, on behalf of our very great grandchildren. Thank you that we have the foresight and the foundation to affect some change here at this conference, to open our hearts and our ears and our minds to one another, to embrace and to accept one another. Thank you again for this opportunity, and for the water, for the Lenape people, and for the Hudson River that flows both ways. We give you thanks for who we are and where we come from. And I thank you for my Hashagoon who are with me here, my ancestors packing water. Thank you again. And I'm going to put this water here that we've prayed over.
Thank you so much, Colleen. So good afternoon, good morning, and good evening again, everyone. My name is Claire Herbert. I work at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, so it's the center of Canada. I work within the Clayton H. Riddle Faculty of Environment, Earth and Resources. I have a few roles. I coordinate an open data research portal for freshwater marine research data there. And I'm also manage a research program called the Manitoba Great Lakes Research Program, where we study the effect of climate change and processes on local, regional, and global scales from source to sea. I'm also co-chair of the University of Manitoba United Nations Academic Impact Hub SDG 6 Working Group, which is why I'm here in this capacity, which I co-chair with Nicole Wilson, who's going to be our moderator for our panel today. And I would like to acknowledge that this side event was co-organized with Carcross, Tagish First Nation, Decolonizing Water, and the Himalayan Peace Foundation. The format of our program will be presentations by our two keynote speakers, Amy Craft and Tanya Martinez, followed by a panel discussion with our other panelists, our esteemed speakers who will introduce themselves, but are Merle Ballard, sorry, Colleen James, Taylor Galvin, Jill Davis, Bowman Chaudhry, and Rajin Humagan, who's online. Bowman's not here, sorry, yes. So I've got we've got Sean joining us from Carcross First Nation. Thank you, Sean. There will be a Q&A session after the panel discussion, so please hold your questions until then. And then you will have an opportunity to ask the panel any questions you have. And then we will finish with a closing prayer. And so I'm now very pleased to introduce Amy as our first speaker.
Thank you. For the hour, I could stay right here. I should sitting and stay sitting. Okay. So hello to you in the back of the room. I shall not stand and wave at you. My name is Amy Craft. I'm greeting you as relatives, and I want to say miigwech to Colleen for that care and for acknowledging that water on this very important day. But I'm sure you do it every day, and I think that that's an important part of this conversation that we're having collectively. Thank you for bringing the collective in. I work as University of Research Chair in Nibinawaki Nakunagewin, which means Indigenous governance in relationship with land and water. Relationship with, not about, on, for, but it's a relationship that we hold with water and lands as Indigenous people. I co-chair also Decolonizing Water Governance. You can see our little logo there. I have some stickers for you if you'd like to take one. Go see our website. And the work that we do is really about decolonizing water governance. And we're not decolonizing water. It's doing a good job of its own trying to decolonize. It's us as humans that we need to decolonize. So that's my core message for today, is thinking about how we can work in relationship with water in ways that are decolonial, that acknowledge the spirit and agency of water, and that take up our responsibilities as humans. One of the core elements of decolonizing our human relationships with water is understanding the question of jurisdiction. I'm a lawyer by trade, and also I teach law. And so that question of jurisdiction is incredibly important. It tells us who gets to decide about what and in what areas. And so that becomes very complex when you think of all those facets of jurisdiction. Those of you who aren't lawyers might say, I don't want to talk about jurisdiction, but jurisdiction is about decision making. And Indigenous people have been removed from decision-making spaces purposefully in colonial contexts, especially in relation to natural resources as colonial powers see them, and on the question of water, very much removed from spheres of decision-making. In Canada, we have a Canada Water Agency that's about to be announced, and we think it's a great opportunity for more Indigenous involvement in decision-making in relation to water. And so that jurisdiction and that decision-making is held within Indigenous nations largely by women. And so we need to think about different forms of decision-making. So I want to urge you to think about decolonial water decision-making that is informed by process as well as substance that has at its core Indigenous values. And let's take a step back. Why is that important? Because Indigenous legal orders, what underlies how we make decisions, are coming from very different foundations than Western legal systems. Western laws are very much about individuals or individualism and protection of private property. When we think to and look to Indigenous legal examples, we're looking at relational foundations and a concept that in Anishinaabe when we call minopimatsuin, which is a collective sense of well-being. So we have these very diametrically opposed legal foundations. So Indigenous law actually has a lot to offer us in terms of the substance of decision-making, the process, the engagement of women in decision-making, and helping us think about water decisions in a dramatically different way. One example that I will share that you can learn a little bit more about on our website is the Nibbe Declaration of Treaty 3. That's a region in northwestern Ontario with 28 First Nations that many of them are still on boil water advisory, long-term boil water advisory. And that has a lot of extractive industry, forestry, mining, and then some. And the Women's Council, so women's jurisdiction, Women's Council of Grand Council Treaty 3 enacted this Nibbe Declaration in accordance with their lawmaking process in 2019. In their own traditional mode of enacting law, but chose to make a declaration that's based on voluntary compliance. And it sets out, Anishinaabe, Nakanagiwin, or Gwidiwin, what gives us those responsibilities to water and explains in about one page. I'm going to stand up. Sorry for those of you who are online, but one page here of written English text. And we have an equally authoritative Anishinaabe version that's available on the website. And what we ask people to do is read this and lend support to it, because these are universal principles and concepts about what it is to be in good relationship with Nibbe or water. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to sit with you, to be part of this discussion. And I think we collectively can acknowledge this important moment in time where we can shift things. My last note is to point to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada that said that reconciliation is about establishing and maintaining mutually respectful relationships. It's an ongoing process. It also requires real commitment to actions and societal change. And we're in a time right now where we need to think differently about how we make decisions relating to water. Note, I'm not going to say govern water, but make decisions to regulate our human conduct in relation to water. And I think some of my colleagues here will share a little bit about their perspectives on that today. So miigwech.
Thank you very much, Elaine. And now I'd like to welcome Tanya.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I was thinking what to share. I'm coming from a weird space. In my community, I would say that we've been lucky enough that we still preserve a lot of our self-determination. Yes, we've been affected by policies, because I always say that there are different ways of grabbing. The grabbings that we see when we are displaced physically from one space to other, the grabbings that we see when they build dams or infrastructure, but also the grabbings with silent policies that come and are implemented, affecting our educational systems, that are detrimental to our language, to our knowledge systems, to our food systems, etc. Yet I come from this mountain that is still managing its territory and waters. So I feel really lucky in that sense, that at the same time, when I hear about the struggles of other people, I feel like maybe that's where my community will end up one day, because people tells me in the lower parts of the mountains, they will reach you one day. So you have to act, you have to protect your community-based organization. So when I think about water, I like giving the example that when we use wooden canes to confer power in my community. And when we receive these wooden canes, the person that gives power for the next governing year needs to wash this wooden cane in a sacred spring. And the idea is that we will clean the whole negative energies, and a lot of the rituals involve the territorial management, but it's water, forests, and everything. It's interconnected in a way. So if we don't take care of the forest, that also means we won't have these springs anymore to make many of these cleansing processes. So I think when we talk about water governance in the Western way of seeing it, many times we fail to embrace many of this holistical perspective and view. If I don't preserve my forest, I won't have the water that helps me for this cleansing process. I won't have the water that allows me to have my food systems. So when we say decolonizing governance, I think we can think at different levels. And I'm going to base that on a 5 key message that came from Dushanbe. My colleague David is at the back, and we were in Dushanbe as part of this water conference, like trying to tell people we need to do things differently, embrace Indigenous peoples' knowledge and voices in 5 essential points. The first part is that we need to think of water as something beyond a commodity. It's life in many ways and connected to our territories. This is what makes the guardians of 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. And I say that we are capable of living in many of the environments that people call hostile. I acknowledge always the people of the Arctic, because when I think of life in the Arctic, to me, it's like, wow, how people live there, it's really cold for me. I did my master's in Arizona, and when I learned about the Tohonos living there, then I was like, wow, they have developed that specific knowledge in these territories to be able to survive in these environments. We also have to think, if we learn to live in these environments, because there's still a lot of challenges when we try to bring up our knowledge, and people says, where's the evidence that your knowledge really works? And I think the evidence is what has kept us living in these challenging or in hostile environments, like many people put them. But at the same time, I've been hearing, we were coming from a pre-summit the last 2 days with Indigenous peoples, and we also see in the session in the morning, we were with the Asian Indigenous Peoples Pact, and they were talking about how people still comes also and grabs their knowledge. But I see that there's many movements within Indigenous communities that are trying, yes, to revitalize our knowledge, to claim it, but also to claim ownership on it, because it's our knowledge. We think of collectively, it's something that we create collectively. It's to be used for everyone, but at the same time, it's ours, something that we've been creating over generations. When we think also about our practices, is that, like I said, we can use them. The whole theme of this conference has been like, let's look at innovations and how we can scale up many of these innovations. There's many things that they can learn from us, and we're ready to go and help the world to learn from us. Our rights should be at the forefront. I think something that has been clear here is like, we're not stakeholders, that we should come to many of these processes as right holders. And finally, that we should be transferring our knowledge to younger generations. And I'm really happy to see a young face here, also to see an older face here, because we say that the orality is what keeps our knowledge alive, and we need to continue creating those bridges if we want to perpetuate, or if we want to continue our knowledge and these sustainable ways of living. I'm not saying so much about governance itself, but I'm pointing out that some elements that I think are necessary if we want to work in governance in itself. But thank you. If you want to learn more about some strategies that we have been developing with other Indigenous organizations, we have created a website that is called Informal Group on Indigenous Peoples Issues. And if you want to connect with other people, just send us an email. My colleague David at the back from the Stockholm Water Institute has been actually alive. And I point out at him because many times when we like working in these synergies, we want to make it Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And I don't think it's necessarily a fight, but how can we create ethical collaborations and bring partners in that way? Thank you.
So now we'll move into the panel portion of our discussion. I think I'm just going to grab a chair here. So my name is Nicole Wilson. I'm the co-chair of the United Nations Academic Impact Hub for Sustainable Development Goal 6 at the University of Manitoba. And I've had the pleasure of helping organize this group, and I'm looking forward to asking some questions. So I think, I guess maybe starting with Sean on the end, we have an extra addition to our panel today. We'll just have everyone go through maybe 1 minute and just give an introduction to yourselves, and then we'll move to some questions. Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My English name is Sean McDougall. My true name is Tagish, which in our language means it's a part of the beaver that's above the water as it swims. And I belong to the Decolonizing clan, which is a beaver clan for the Tlingit people, which our nations resides in the Panhandle area of Alaska, as well as southern Yukon and northwestern BC. I'm a executive counselor for our First Nations. We are unique in many ways where we are a self-governing nation. We are not a numbered treaty. So we do have opportunities to negotiate and create policies and such with governments from government to government relations. So water is very important for our community because we do in our traditional territory, it's the headwaters for the Yukon River as well as for the rest of the Yukon. And so it's very important to us, and we really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas and to talk about what our experience and process is. Chief, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Colleen James. My Tlingit name is Coach Ba. It means wolf's mother. And like Sean, I come from the headwaters of the Yukon River in northern Canada. And we're a settled First Nation. We signed a treaty and voted in 2007. So we have a number of mechanisms and tools within that treaty, but I too am a clans person. But we're fortunate in being a First Nation that has two. So there's the Athabascan. So we're inland Tlingit, and we're also Athabascan. So we have two languages in our background, both of which we are trying to reclaim. We have two living people that speak the language now. So even just, we talk about truth and reconciling that language. So we come from the headwaters, and like Sean said, we're very much, we have some tools, but they need to be sharpened. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these tools that we have that need to be sharpened. And I'm really happy to have our youth with us here today. And I also brought, I packed the water here from our area. And this is a traditional place names map. It's an aqua-centric map that we've been working on since 2016. And you're welcome to take a deeper look at it a little bit later on. But I'm packing the water from our home country here because we're finding that our place names in water are very important and that water is life.
Good afternoon. I'm Merle Ballard. I'm an Anishinaabe from Lake St. Martin First Nation, which is in Manitoba, central Manitoba. And I'm with the University of Manitoba as a professor, faculty of science, and I'm also the director of Indigenous Science and Environment Climate Change Canada. So why I'm here, I've done a lot of my work with First Nations people around the Interlake region of Manitoba. The Interlake region of Manitoba, downstream from the Clifford Dam, was flooded since the 1960s. And then growing up, I observed changes at the land where we were once a very prosperous, sustainable community going into one of the poorest communities in Canada. So we've been flooded repeatedly. In 2011, we were forced and displaced. When you think of displacement of a First Nation as I think of the past, but it's not. We were forced displaced, of course, relocated that to a different piece of land in 2011. And when we talk about the decolonizing water, we need to think of what that means for First Nations. It's not about because First Nations were very marginalized, like from the communities that I'm from, downstream from the Paper Dam. We weren't listened to when they were flooding us. We tried to tell the governments, both levels of governments, no, but they didn't listen. But I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'll take up the whole hour.
Bonjour Annie, bonjour Moshkode, Vijike, Indigenous Namedo Dam, Basca, Dabwe, Sibling, Anishinaabe Aki. Hello, my colonial name is Taylor. My traditional name is Brown Buffalo from the Sturgeon clan in beautiful Broken Head Ojibwe Nation, which is southeast Manitoba in Canada. I'm a environmental science student. I focus actually on wildlife management because water's in my blood and my DNA, and it's something that I've done my whole life. And so I wanted to try a little something different. I'm here with the University of Manitoba as a delegate as well, and representing my community of Broken Head. And I also work with Merle at the Indigenous Science Division within Environment and Climate Change Canada. And so for me, I'm here to really share and bring light to my community, which is Broken Head. We're very small, but we are a wetlands community. We're situated right along Lake Winnipeg, which is the 10th biggest lake in the world, but also one of the most polluted. And so one of the things that I try to promote and engage, especially with the youth, is to protect our wetlands because they are our natural filtration systems. And our problem in Broken Head is not so much with hydro and things like that, but we are very subject to agriculture, and we're surrounded by agriculture and urban development because we're in such close proximity to the city. So assimilation is also very something that also affects our youth right now. Everybody wants to go to the city and not be on the res. Not gonna lie, I kind of miss being on the res. It's a real big city for me. But I'm here to just try to promote the importance of protecting wetlands along as that source of water from my perspective, from a Ojibwe perspective. So Kitchi Miigwech for having me. This is an amazing opportunity and I'm very grateful.
Hi everyone, Yeknishin Kakatuku, Yakatu Saklingakina, Daklawadi Ayahat. My Tlingit names are Yeknishin and Katuku, and I belong to the Daklawadi or the Kilauea clan of the inland Tlingit people. I've grown up in Teslin, which is a small community 2 hours south of Whitehorse, the capital within Yukon. And I'm also a member of the Carcross Tagish First Nation. And yeah, I'm really excited and grateful to be here and looking forward to sharing some of our ideas around how we as a First Nation are creating water governance and what that looks like. And yeah, grateful to be here. So Ganeshish.
And on Zoom, we have Raj. Raj, would you like to introduce yourself? You're on mute right now, Raj.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Raj. I'm from Nepal, and we have been working with Himalayan Peace Foundation. I represent Himalayan Peace Foundation, and we have been working for different policy level things with government on national level and local level for Indigenous peoples' right and sustainable use of water. And it's very nice to be with you guys. It's an honor. It's an opportunity for us. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Raj. So now we'll move to a little bit of discussion. I'd like to invite the two first speakers to join in if you have thoughts on these questions as well. So many of you touched on this in your introduction, but how do Indigenous peoples understand and relate to water? Can you tell us a little bit about your relationships to water? And anyone can just jump in.
Maybe I can start. The relationship we have with water in my community is called Lake St. Martin First Nation. You're situated right on the lake. And growing up, my view was of the lake, the island. We have an island, the Sugar Island. And the stories my mom shared with me growing up was about the water, everything based on water. Stories of the way they used water before, like they used to go to the water and do their laundry, spend the whole day there just doing laundry, take lunch, whatever. And they used to go across the lake too. My grandpa, I guess, would put a sail on the boat, and they would just sailed across water like wind. And the stories of the way they use water, like during the winter, they would chop big chunks of ice, and they use that ice to store their meat, produce right up until July. Like, and that's the way they use water, frozen, fresh, whatever. And Lake St. Martin is it's got a north shore and a north basin and a south basin. So we have little narrows with the lake systems there's always a kind of a body that's narrow, and that's where the indigenous people call the kidney of the lake. That's the filtering system. So that was a natural filtering system between the North Basin and the South Basin. And growing up, they shared stories, indigenous people, where they used to go across during summer and spend the summers there. They used to just walk across the narrows with the cattle and that go spend summers there. Then when the province built the first dam in 1961, the flooding started, and then the channel started getting wider. The narrows, it's called. The narrows that started getting wider, deeper. Then they couldn't cross anymore. And the natural filtration process got ruined. It's not the same. The North Basin is where the spawning grounds are, and then the South Basin. And the fishers tell stories of the fish that they used to get to the fish in the lake, where they got like lots and lots of boxes, 50 boxes or more. One season, my uncle shared with me that they took their fish at Wissel, and then the CEOs questioned them, where did you steal that fish from? It's from the lake. No, you steal it. No, it's from the lake. So like these fish, lots of fish, and now there's not that much fish, and that's because of the water, the way the water was flooded, the use of the dam flooding, a water control structure, release, you pull back, release, pull back, and that's the way. And the way, that's where I remember the lake. But there's a lot more I could. Maybe later on, after other people talk, I'll talk about the flooding or what happened after the flooding. Yeah.
So from where we come from, our understanding of water is that it's absolutely the life-giving force. The absolute most mysterious thing in life. It comes in a number of forms. And over the 4 seasons, we follow the seasonal round, we call it. I am also of the Decolonizing clan, which is the killer whale clan. And we're the clan that made the killer whale. We're the clan that migrated from the Telegraph Creek area up into the Tagish area where we come from now. So our relationships, we cry water. We have spiritual ceremonies where we don't drink water for 4 days in order to spiritually acquire a gift that's going to help our whole community. Or we have what you call sweat lodge ceremonies called Hai in our language. My grandma used to tell my grandpa, Hai Denagu, go to your hut tent now, she would tell him. So our relationships, we come from a people that made dugout canoes from huge trees. We created these boats and traveled great distances by water. It's our life-giving force. And where we come from now, the Yukon River watershed and the Yukon River itself, there's a big hydroelectric dam in our traditional territory, and the Yukon's energy plans have 3 of the big projects within our traditional territory. So those tools I told you about earlier, regional land use planning, water is very important to us. Like Sean was saying, we want to be able to protect it, right? And we don't feel that it's being respected or protected. And we want to be able to give back, and we want to be able to collectively make agreements. So in the Yukon, we have a pretty good relationship compared, and I don't like to compare to other areas. So we have joint fish and wildlife decision-making bodies, or joint land and management regimes. And there's the shells and the maize and the agreement and on all of those kinds of things. So we are working towards land and water foundation amongst the First Nations, where it's called How We Walk with the Land and Water. And that's we collectively, all of us, right? How do we walk with the land and the water together? collectively, because what we're doing now is not working. It's not in the best interest of all of the waters that we all depend on, so, and we've made our place. It's not a place we've inhabited for time immemorial. It's a place we've made, and it's a place that we have connection with, whether it's Land Otter Point, the place where the ice is breaking up, or slow moving river, or the water that comes from the mountain. Our place names are 2/3% water related, and our first experience in life is within our mother's bellies, surrounded by water, so our relationships are a lot deeper than we've been taught in school. So water and land are not separable, and a lot of what we are saying with you, our relatives, our brothers and our sisters, is that we have to shift and do things differently, because it's time now. It's not the 11th hour, it's the 12th hour.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to how we see ourselves in relationship with water. Yeah, growing up on my grandma's fish camp, my mom it was very strict that you're not supposed to play with the water or the fire. You're not supposed to mess around with it, and you're supposed to have the utmost respect for that, because that water can take your life and it can give you life as well. So really upholding that respect, as well as understanding that we are water. We're mostly water, and that we have a saying back home, said by Virginia Smarch, that we are part of the land and we are part of the water. And that's something that's deeply entrenched within our worldview. And we don't see it just as a resource, which implies that it's outside of us or it's disconnected for us and it's there for us to use and it's there for us to take. It's a deeply entrenched part of our relationship with who we are as Yukon, or as Tlingit, Carcross, Tagish First Nations, and that it is a reciprocal relationship, meaning that we need to take care of it as it gives us life and takes care of us. And as Colleen mentioned before, we have processes in Yukon, specifically within 3 of the First Nations set up. So in Yukon, we have modern treaties, they're called, and underneath that we have land claims agreements as well as self-government agreements. So we are a self-governing First Nation, and as well as 2 other First Nations in the Yukon. So Carcross Tagish First Nation, Kwanlin Dun First Nation, and the Ta'an Pajon Council came together and decided that what we currently have in place for the land use planning framework underneath the umbrella final agreement is called, which is the overarching agreement for modern treaties in the Yukon. Chapter 11 is land use planning, and within that agreement, chapter 14 is water management. So even within our own agreements, they're being separated, which is deeply not representative of how we see ourselves in relationship with the land and the water. So the 3 First Nations came together and created this initiative called How We Walk with the Land and the Water, that is working towards creating our own land use plan that encapsulates water and land, that's based off of our values, based off of our worldviews and our traditional laws. So working within that, we are really trying to create a land relationship vision, we're calling it, opposed to land use planning, because even the words and the titles we use have power. And the fact that use is in the name, implying that we are here to use the land and we're here to use the water, is just not right, and it's not okay within our own First Nations worldviews. So that's something that we're working towards within the Yukon, really highlighting that relationship, that integral relationship that we share with the land and that we share with the water. Yeah.
And I also think that, like, when we look at ceremony is something that's very important for us, and it's something that keeps our connection of self with our land and the water. And water is widely looked at as being a woman's medicine, and so it is because it is a medicine that gives life. But there's also areas within for men's ceremony for water to be very prominent, and that's with our cold water ceremonies as well as many other ceremonies. And the reason why I state this is that, one of the really unique things with the Indigenous peoples across the world is that our relationship with the land and water is a very complicated, holistic view. We understand how water affects other areas. If you flood out a basin to create a dam, that could shift the migration patterns of caribou, which will divert the whole ecosystems and such. We don't compartmentalize like how governments frequently do, of saying we're talking about water, we're talking about land, we're talking about land and caribou and such. We see it as the real holistic view of how the balance is needed in order for our environment to be healthy. And, you know, up in the Yukon, we're also very unique in the way that we were the last people that were colonized. We're, we didn't even know about outside people until the late 1700s. And people that were not originally from the Yukon did not enter the Yukon until the mid 1800s. So the elders that we learned from up in the Yukon and in our communities of both Tagish and Tlingit, the elders that we learned from, the elders that they learned from, were alive before contact even happened. And that's really left our land in a very pristine state. And now we're with the rare earth metals that are coming in with the electric vehicles, with the carbon, with like in the Blueberry area in northern BC, they just found the largest carbon, or they're calling a carbon bomb there, because there's so much oil and gas that it's very concerning. And in order to get that, you need water. And so governments and researchers are coming to the Indigenous peoples now saying, we actually understand that your understanding of water is greater than what we understand, because we grew up in the cities. So now we got to research to you and ask for help. And this is what we are offering is to say, you know, we do have a very innate understanding, and we do want to give the warnings of the imbalance that has currently happened, which is the reason why we're here. And to try to find solutions and working relationships with other First Nation agencies and governments so that we can live on this beautiful planet in balance.
I see Raj, you have your hand raised up there.
Hi. You know, when we talk about water, I come from a hilly region where, you know, it's not snowing in Nepal, and there is plain Tarai, but we live right in the middle where it's not snowing and there is not much river. So when we think of, when I had, you know, thought of water, you know, it played a role where it affected me as a child when you know, until I became young, and until I became or until I traveled to developed countries, because there was no river, a big, you know, river that was enough to swim, and you know, it was very hard for us to irrigate. But the small stream that was flowing, you know, not too far from our house was worshipped, you know, as the god of giving food, and then god of, you know, providing food, and you know, all those things that, you know, keep plants alive. And it was the main thing for irrigation that fed for like the whole village. And you know, having the thought that the river was for, you know, to learning swimming, then it was not available. And you know, during 10 years and 15 years of time, I saw that river being, you know, the stream being encroached from like both sides. And then at the end, it ended up like a canal, like very small one. And, you know, we ended up losing that stream as well. So right now, it is like really hard for the people to get irrigation. And, you know, even like last year, I was walking with my little boy who is like 8 years old, and he was like, you know, okay, so I told him, okay, this is the river, or it's a small stream, and they could not believe it because the river they see in, books or movies or, in videos are like much different. And, the reality in a lot of places like in Nepal and in, in like different developing countries are not actually what they read on the books. And, my little boys were asking me, okay, so where is the river? It is just a place where, it floods during the rainy season and there is nothing much. So it really plays not just social, but psychological, implications on child and people living over there, and people like me or people like my age, we ended up losing the whole ecosystem of a stream or a river that was flowing right in front of our eyes. So it is really unfortunate in so many places in Nepal.
Thank you, Raj. Anyone else want to respond? So I guess before we move to the question and answer, I do have one other question for the panelists that maybe some of you can respond to. So MA mentioned that we need to decolonize governance. So what kind of game-changing or critical actions are needed in order to do that? What do you need from non-Indigenous peoples, basically? So, if anyone wants to respond.
That's a complicated question. Relationship building is key. Acknowledging the knowledge of our ancestors and what we have been taught is key. Listening to us and looking beyond economics is key. What can be done? Greater collaborative policy implementation. If there's policies that are out there that regulate mining, that regulate extraction of gases, that regulate hydro dams, if we're included in that process, then I really believe that the footprint that is going to be left behind for generations will be much less. And so, we're actually, as a CTFN with the Carcross Tagish First Nation, we're currently in negotiations with provincial and federal governments for further land claims. And that was done because of borders that were not created by us. So we've had to negotiate in different times. So in collaborative negotiating and for governments to look beyond the economic impacts of just take, I think will really greatly further our understanding and our relationships, because we are the ones on the land that see the changes. We are the ones who notice these differences that are happening. So collaborate with us, talk with us before setting that drill in the ground, before tapping into the water sources. Come speak to us, because there's also a lot of heritage sites that we don't share with people because they're so sacred of us. And so that's part of the relationship building, is to understand, yes, these are the people, the original people from this land. They have a long history, so they should have a strong voice. So I'd say that.
I would say, I'm going to use a concrete example. The building of the Kiosk hydroelectric development in northern Manitoba, the most recent dam. Jill Blakely and I edited a book volume on this. The environmental decision making took into account mostly Western science in coming to a conclusion about residual adverse effects, and use mitigation measures as a way to achieve that conclusion of no residual significant adverse effects. But the Indigenous knowledge and conclusions that came out of the environmental hearing were quite different. They said there will be residual adverse effects, and they were honest about it. But which perspective ultimately won out is the one that allowed the development to continue. And I think that we need to shift our mindsets, and I'm gonna propose something a little more radical than collaboration. I think Indigenous people should decide. And that if we're going to reverse Indigenous decisions, that those have to be very well justified in a series of decision-making contexts that include Indigenous decision makers. Which is not that radical if you think about it from the flip side, because that's what's been happening from Western perspective for hundreds of years. So, put the decision-making into Indigenous hands, and then have the non-Indigenous decision makers having to justify their decisions in relation to that. And the beauty of, I think any response I've gotten from any First Nations or other Indigenous people that I've talked to about this is they said, we actually wouldn't want to exclude anyone else from decision making. We would invite them in. So circling back to collaboration, I think that there's actually room for that. But if we start from the mindset that we're flipping it to Indigenous decision makers deciding within their territories, I think we have a much better chance to have better decisions, holistic decisions, and ones that recognize the relationships we have with our living environments, right?
Sorry. I'm just gonna kind of follow up with what MA is saying is, I'll say more a little controversially, but I would say in non-Indigenous people should stop taking up Indigenous spaces. And that is something that I've seen time and time again, even when it comes to like grants and different types of funding. We see a lot of non-Indigenous people getting a lot of Indigenous funding, and whether they're employing Indigenous people or not, they're still taking up that space. And that's something that I very much struggle with. And the other thing would be that I, as a post-secondary student especially, I don't like that I need to turn to Western education in order to be heard in this type of capacity. And that's the struggle I've had. I've been in an undergrad for much longer than the average person would take, because I don't relate to the content that they provide to me. We're an oral people, and the fact that I have to write everything, and I write the way I talk, and so I don't get the best grades when it comes to written, because I don't write in a scientific language. And so I think we need to start building these employment opportunities for traditional knowledge keepers and elders, and not force them to have 5 years of academic backgrounds or be known as a doctor or like have all of this education that where we already know we are the doctors of the land. We're the natural stewards. We've been doing it for centuries and for so long. And so I think that stigma of having to have a Western education background needs to be silenced a little bit in order for us to really have our voices wholeheartedly heard. So.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, following up on, I also agree with all of these points. It's super important to think about making space for Indigenous people and what that looks like, because they need to be valued as if they're experts, because that's what they are. So start valuing them as that. And then another point I would say is, instead of just jumping into learning Indigenous knowledges from around the world, take the time and learn about your own worldview first. Learn about the Western worldview. Learn about where these ideologies come from, because it's not reality. It's just one simple worldview that's been imposed imposed on many Indigenous cultures around the world, but it really is just one worldview. So where do these ideas of like hierarchical systems come from? Where does this value of individuality come from? And where does this idea that humans are disconnected from the land and are able to use it as a resource, where does that come from? Because they do have origins and they do have spaces where they come from, and they're not really just for balance. So I would say definitely learn about that, understand that your worldview is just one worldview. That's the Western worldview is not coming from a balanced place. And then you can step into better understanding different Indigenous worldviews. So why we see ourselves in relationship with the land, why we consider spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical all parts of ourselves, and we count those. We don't suppress our emotional and our spiritual as if they don't exist. Why do we see ourselves as community, valuing community opposed to seeing ourselves as just individuals? And why do we say that we're a part of the land and part of the water? Because those are all true. And I think to better understand that, you first have to understand where you're coming from and where these ideas start. Because even though, like, speaking to my specific First Nations worldview, it's first of all for us Tlingit First Nations, all of us as humans share these connections. And they have just been really oppressed over generations of colonization, and Indigenous peoples from around the world have been strong enough to hold on to these umbilical connections that all of humans are supposed to share. And that's why I think that Indigenous people should be leading the way when it comes to specifically water governance, but much more.
I was going to share, the thing that, that's really important is the use of language. For example, my language, Anishinaabe, when Colleen showed us a map of Anishinaabe names. Within our language, we have names of places and spaces that are based on the natural law of the space and that space. And these are based on, they were named because of the role of the ecosystem within that. For example, Saskatchewan, you know, Saskatchewan is in Canada. That name means Saskatchewan. That's my language, Saskatchewan, but the anglicized is Saskatchewan. But what that means is where the water drains, where the water evaporates, where the water dissipates. That's what that means. And if you think of that region before the borders of the provinces, the water coming from the watershed of the Rockies, blue, and the natural landscape of the region is very, it's got a lot of potassium. When you drive across the country there, it's all white, like minerals. But that's what that means, where the water disappears. That's what that means. And then when you start developing the monitors based on these Anishinaabe names across the country, oh, it's so powerful of the history of the names and the role of the ecosystem. Those are so important.
We'll give Raj and then Colleen, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Hello. You know, the discussions we do about water and Indigenous people in developed countries and developing or underdeveloped countries are a little different, because the way government works there and the government works here or developing countries are really, really different. Because I would like to give you an example of a very famous river right in the heart of capital city of Nepal, which is called Bagmati. And a World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and big international organizations are funding to make the infrastructure right on the side of the river. But you know, you cannot just walk by or drive by the river, because all of the drainage are being dumped into the river and nobody cares. There has been like hundreds of protests. There has been like so many laws being violated, but we don't understand why all these organizations keep funding without having, you know, right checks, so that, you know, this has to be done, this has to be done. It has been like this for tens of years. And all of those rivers flowing right in the heart of Kathmandu city, probably 5 of them are not river anymore. They all are drainage. And, you know, now it goes to local government and same thing happens. So, you know, we need to talk about the issues that are little differently dealt by governments on developing countries and underdeveloped countries, because you know, the voices from developed countries and communities are heard by government little, you know, taken little seriously. But a lot of issues raised by Indigenous people or communities, or even, you know, other communities who live around river or water sources, they don't care. You know, like, you know, we talked about water dams being built, and there are like a lot of water dams being built in Nepal for clean energy, maybe, you know, hydro projects and all those things, which are being funded by big banks and all of those. But a lot of people, you know, majority of people never even know that there is a water dam being built right, you know, in front of their home, and then they are going to lose their houses, lose their land and everything. And, you know, and when we protest, they say like, this is part of the law. And then, you know, We don't know where all this law comes from. And then it is very hard to raise our voices to the concern, and they don't listen at all. You know, it is really hard, and we need international communities come together for a goal where we can just, you know, make government responsible, whether it is a national government or local government. So, you know, it is very important to think a little differently for developing and underdeveloped countries.
And how do is the governance is our plan, our hakusti'i, we call it. It's our ways of knowing. We have a plan that supports the collective and not the individual. So as a Daklawedi clan member, I don't just represent myself, I'm representing everyone within my clan. So if I hurt you or if I offend you, it's not just me that's responsible for that. It's my whole clan. And we create a ceremony and we try to make amends with you. We try to make peace. We try to make compensation. We try to make it better than it was. And these are the kind of systems we're coming from. And then the residential schools came in and really disrupted it. So we were like this little intact beehive, you know, the queen knew her thing, and then somebody stuck a stick in there, and we still trying to get that queen back to her spot within the hive so that it's intact and that it's balanced, right? So part of that is using our own systems and drawing you in. Everyone has a plan. Everyone has a family group or a position and a right to be in the circle to have these discussions. And it was about plan to have discussions. Oh, we're in trouble. Let's have a discussion. Let's sit around and have a little discussion, and together we can collectively share it. So that's a big part of how we do governance within the Yukon, but not one the governments have wholly embraced with us yet. But we're still patiently, you know, working on that, as well as the How We Walk initiative. We've had a proclamation a couple of years ago that said to you, the governments, or to you, the stakeholders, companies, and whoever that wanted to come in and develop this, that, or the other in our traditional territory, that you would just talk to us, come and talk to us. So we created a bit of a portal to cut out all the red tape and all the middleman so that you could directly communicate with us. Yeah, so those are some of the tools that we're using, and that we have sacred responsibilities. We have responsibilities. One man told me once, the only rights we have as Indigenous people is the right to be responsible. And it's the same thing.
So I'm going to wrap up this portion of the discussion. We've got time for one question before we ask Colleen to close us up here. So is there anyone who wants to ask us a question from the audience?
I'd like to ask Raj if the Nepalese government has sent a delegation to the UN Water Conference, or if you've had any communication with the Nepalese ambassador to the UN regarding the issues you just brought up with respect to no community engagement around projects. Could you hear that?
Yeah, could you please repeat the question? It's kind of hard to.
So the question was about whether a Nepalese delegation was sent and whether you've been in communication with the Nepalese ambassador about the issues that you raised.
Yes, actually, you know, I was getting communication, me and one another gentleman, you know, Fulman Chaudhary from another organization. We worked before, you know, water conference as well. Like before it was being organized, we were getting few communications because, you know, our good friend Tanya, you know, introduced us. And once we know the water conference was being held, we tried to work with the government. And, you know, it was so hard to work with the government. We tried to you know, work with government secretary, we tried to work with the ministers, and it was so hard even to get like communication, even to get, you know, working with them. And after submitting tons of papers and so many things, and finally we heard that they were collaborating with an organization based in Sri Lanka. So they did not even choose one organization that actually was from Nepal, raising issues of Nepal. And they did not, at the end, they did not even wanted to meet us. So it is really unfortunate, for countries like us, because, it has been really tough time getting cooperation, getting work with government, with local government and, national government, central government. It has been really like very tough time over here.
Thank you. So I'm getting a signal that we have just 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask Colleen to close us up here.
Okay. Please bow your heads in prayer with me. We give you thanks, Creator God, for this opportunity to put our hearts and our minds together. And we pray at this time for balance in our lives, in the human family. As I think about Raj and the river he lives by and the story we just heard, we pray in gratitude that the world will hear what's happening to the river beside him. That the underdeveloped countries can be acknowledged, can be heard, that the rivers in those areas and the waters in those areas can be grateful, we can be grateful for them, that they can be appreciated, that they can be respected, and that the relationships can flow. We thank you that as humanity, that we work together and leave no one behind, that we find balance in the protection of water and the protection of human life and all life that has been gifted to us on Mother Earth. Thank you again for this conference. And thank you again for all the people who have left their home fires to come to this conference. And thank you that we may all get in the human boat together and paddle in the same direction with love and guidance and spirit and intention. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists, and I encourage you to continue the discussion after we're done here. So thank you.